and I yield.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to rebut a little bit the argument that's been made by my colleagues on the other side that Republicans aren't willing to secure resources for the border. And I'll just tell you that that is a complete, absolute misstatement of fact. In September, the House of Representatives passed an appropriations package for the Department of Homeland Security that appropriated an additional $2 billion. Those funds would go to hire additional agents. Those funds would go to merit pay. Those funds would go to invest in additional technology to stop the flow of fentanyl coming into this country. We also passed H.R. 2, which would have done the exact same thing. And so for my colleagues on the other aisle to say we should be more focused on funding DHS and what we're doing here today, I would argue that we have done that. We passed our appropriations bill, we sent it to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer has let that bill sit there, gathering dust, refusing to bring either H.R. 2 or the House Appropriations Bill to the Senate for a vote. And so for them to say that is a complete and utter misstatement of the facts. Professor Pearlstein, I do agree with you in your statement where you said that we do not have to have a violation of the federal criminal code for impeachment, and agree with you when you say serious offenses against public trust would arise to the level of impeachment. Prior to being elected to Congress, I served as a prosecutor in my local community, tried many jury trials. I remember often hearing the judges tell potential jurors that reasonable, good-minded people can reach different conclusions when applying facts to the law. The law in this case, I believe, is the Constitution, the impeachment clause, that we as reasonable members of Congress must apply the facts. And the facts, as I view them, and they may be different than viewed by other members of Congress, everyone views those using their own perspective, I believe that there is ample evidence. I believe that Secretary Mayorkas violated his oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I believe that Secretary Mayorkas has willfully failed to enforce the law, particularly the INA, where it says repeatedly that the Secretary shall detain and remove immigrants. I believe that Secretary Mayorkas has lied to Congress when he has repeatedly come in and said that the border is secure. I'll tell you an example. Just last year, in April of last year, as Secretary Mayorkas came and he sat there where you were sitting, Ms. Dunn, I had the opportunity to ask him, are all 9 sectors of the southwest border secure? And his answer was yes. Now, his answer contradicted the answer given just 3 weeks prior by his Chief of Border Patrol, Chief Ortiz, when Chief Ortiz said 5 of the 9 sectors on our southwest border are not secure. So I believe he's violated his oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I believe that he has willfully failed to enforce the law, and I believe that he has lied to Congress. Now, Professor, I see in your statement that you provided, you say that really only on 2 occasions, back in 1804 and 1872, where you had the removal of 2 U.S. district judges, where they were removed, one because one was chronically inebriated and the other was mentally incapacitated. And you said that they were unable to carry out their duties because of that. I believe that a person who willfully chooses not to carry out their duties is more impeachable than someone who has some sort of mental inability to do so. And I believe that the record is clear if you look at what this committee has done to show that Secretary Mayorkas has refused to carry those duties out. Now, I want to ask you, because you clearly say in your report, Professor, that you've given, that Congress, that there appears to be no constitutional basis for pursuing this impeachment. My question is relating to a different impeachment matter. Did you feel that way last Congress for the 2 impeachments of President Trump? Did you feel that there was a constitutional basis for the impeachment of Donald Trump, either his first or second impeachment?
I did.
Okay, and so this matter differs and Secretary Mayorkas from both the first and second impeachment of the former president?
Yes,
And in what manner?
several. First, although I've heard now several times the allegation here that Secretary Mayorkas was in some respect violating his legal responsibility, those claims, the specific claims you've raised about detention, enforcement power, were raised and litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court by the state of Texas.
Ms. Perlin, let me ask,
And the
can
Supreme Court ruled against
can reasonable people look at the facts and draw different conclusions?
Reasonable people can't draw different conclusions about the law as applied here.
You have to apply the law to the facts. I understand, and I don't believe that there's consensus that your version of what you believe the law is actually
Gentleman's time has
not.
expired.
I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for the purpose of entering something into the record.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a article, Why America is Struggling to Stop the Fentanyl Epidemic, and an article that says how fentanyl crisis, fourth wave, has hit every corner of the United States. Ask unanimous consent to place those in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Before I begin, I want to first personally thank these brave witnesses for being here. Our heart goes out to you and your families for your incredible loss. We all recognize the significance and the importance of this matter. It's been brought to my attention that our chairman, as we speak, is in the hallway doing an interview with Fox News instead of listening to the testimony of these heartbroken parents. I think that demonstrates just where we should be. We should be here, not talking to talking heads and feeding into that. My colleagues have spent the past year blaming Secretary Mayorkas for longstanding issues like immigration, drug addiction, crime, and so forth. However, impeachment over differences in policy is not constitutional. It also solves exactly nothing for the problems that we were sent here to Congress to solve. It's high time that we, as members of Congress, must come together to pass laws that combat fentanyl in our communities and fund drug treatment programs to help save lives, not to determine who has the biggest megaphone or the biggest political voice to exact vengeance. Our job is to serve and to come up with solutions together, Republican and Democrat, to solve our nation's problems. Professor Pearlstein, would impeaching Secretary Mayorkas over policy differences between the Biden administration and House Republicans solve any problems facing our country?
I don't believe it would. The president retains exclusive constitutional power to replace Secretary Mayorkas with another official who he would charge with pursuing exactly the same policies here.
Is it a bit disingenuous to suggest that somehow this is new? The issues that we're facing are new at the border, and somehow that it was perfect before Secretary Mayorkas took over?
My knowledge, just based on Supreme Court cases, of the number of cases that have arisen surrounding executive actions over border policies and reading the history there, suggests that these problems have existed through 5 administrations over decades, largely because Congress has enacted contradictory laws that are impossible to comply with, and multiple administrations have struggled to resolve that contradiction.
Many of the Republicans complain that the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas are not doing enough on immigration, border security, fentanyl, or crime. Professor Pearlstein, does Congress have any role in resolving these longstanding issues? If so, please explain.
Thank you, Representative. As I've mentioned before, Congress has a central role. Indeed, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held, in cases going back more than a century, that Congress's power in this area is plenary, meaning absolute. That is not to say that the executive doesn't retain, under his own Article II authority, enforcement power, but Congress can not only appropriate funds, it can impose conditions on funds, and in the opinion folks are so fond of citing in the recent Supreme Court cases, While impeachment is certainly one power that Congress has, oversight, appropriations, the legislative process, Senate confirmations, withholding funds, and of course, centrally, elections are all tools that are available to Congress and to the American people to affect change here.
And are withholding funds because you are unhappy with the secretary in any way helpful to the issues that these two grieving mothers have faced and others may continue to face?
I can't imagine that it is.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter this into the record. Synthetic opioid overdose deaths soared while Trump was president. Not my words. This report of March 2nd, 2023.
Without objection.
Between 2019 and 2020, the last year of Trump's presidency, the increase in drug overdose deaths from synthetic opioid was at 55%. Between 20 and 21, the first year of Joe Biden's presidency, the increase in drug overdose deaths from synthetic opioid was at 25%. Not my words. I'll enter this into the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I will tell you this. This is nothing to be proud of that one president had higher than another, but it is a fact that requires discussion. But it isn't anything to be proud of because if it were just 1%, if it was just one daughter, one son, one child that was impacted by this horrible drug that's in our communities now, that comes across our borders now, not necessarily by immigrants, but primarily by those that are seeking to do harm and to enter the drug trade. What do we do when we strip off our party veils and say, let's fix this issue, regardless of our party? Let's take away the notion that this one man, Secretary Mayorkas, is this boogeyman. And we send the message to the rest of the world, if we can just get rid of him, all of our problems would go away. It isn't fair, it's disingenuous, it's misleading to the American people. They deserve better, and we can do better. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Pearlstein, do you believe that dereliction of duty is an impeachable offense?
The only examples in U.S. history I cited in my testimony, the words dereliction of duty weren't charged, they weren't the articles of impeachment, but those circumstances were where judges, the officers at issue, were either chronically drunk or mentally incapable of performing their duties, or both.
Do you believe that failure to uphold your oath to protect the homeland, is that an impeachable offense?
I don't believe that anybody has ever been impeached for a failure.
I didn't ask the question. I said, do you believe that somebody who fails to uphold their oath to protect the homeland, is that an impeachable offense?
I believe that somebody who acts in his own interests or the interests of gaining his own power or in the interests of a foreign power is impeachable.
So you don't think that somebody who fails to uphold the oath to protect the homeland and does it in a way that's a dereliction of duty, you don't believe that that's impeachable? That somehow Congress doesn't have the right to exercise its power of impeachment to remove that individual who is clearly violating his oath and is derelict in his duty? You don't think that Congress can do that?
I don't know that there's evidence here of dereliction of duty.
I didn't say
with
if there's
respect to the
evidence. I'm not
violation of
asking
the oath.
evidence.
If it's a violation of the oath to the
Ma'am, I reclaim my
Constitution.
time. I reclaim my time. I'd like for you to answer my question, not your question. Okay, my question is very specific. I didn't say about this case. I'm just talking in general, all right?
In general, depending on the circumstances, depending on the violation of the Constitution, it's conceivable, yes.
Okay, so if we determine that Mr. Mayorkas is derelict in his duty and has failed to uphold his oath to protect the homeland, in our opinion, okay, then is that an impeachable offense?
Again, dereliction of duty is different from failure to comply with the oath. right? To the extent the oath
I said
says a
both.
variety of
I said
things-
both. So,
Well, they're two different legal arguments. so
some
forgive
said
me.
both. Okay?
So I've addressed the
You can be,
question.
can't you be guilty of doing two things at the same time?
I've addressed the impeachability of dereliction of duty.
Okay,
The
very
question
good.
of the oath is something separate. To the extent it raises an allegation of a violation of the Constitution, it is potentially impeachable, but here the Supreme Court has rejected that argument.
I don't believe they have, but anyway, I'll move on. Is a violation of law, is that when an individual clearly violates the law, is that an impeachable offense? Depending on the law, I guess, right? I mean, how serious that law is that your interpretation?
Impeachment, right, is only about a certain category of offenses. It only addresses a certain category of offenses. It has to be an offense similar to treason or bribery, that is, an offense against the system of government, not any ordinary criminal offense, something that disrupts the structure of the Constitution or our system of government.
Very good. Okay, thank you. So, allowing millions and millions of people to come into the United States, violating the clear intent of Congress when it says that in order to be paroled into the United States, it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, and you do it on a mass basis. That actually may have something, may affect the land. It may affect the structure of government. I would argue that, and so I guess it's up to the Supreme Court to determine that eventually. Now, Ms. Dunn, let me say that I feel deeply for you and your loss. Actually, in my extended family, we had the same kind of loss due to fentanyl. Do you believe that the multinational criminal organizations, the cartels that are working across the border, do you believe that they are terrorist organizations, for lack of a better word?
Yes, sir, I do.
And they're guilty of mass murder?
Yes, sir, I do believe that.
And I do too. And I believe also one of the things that Mr. Mayorkas has shown to be derelict in his duty is the absolute failure of this administration to combat what I consider to be terrorist organizations, which are the Mexican drug cartels that control the border. And by the way, I also believe the Biden administration is actually helping those organizations by not stemming the flow of illegal immigration. They are enriching those multinational organizations to the tune of billions of dollars, which allows them to produce more fentanyl, which allows them to kill tens of thousands of American citizens. And so for that, too, I believe that Mr. Mayorkas has failed miserably in his duty to protect the homeland. And with that, my time has expired, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Thanadar is recognized for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all of our witnesses here today. My sincere condolences to our witnesses. As a father and a grandfather, I sympathize with your unimaginable loss. As a member of Congress, I realize it is my duty and my colleagues' duty to do all we can to prevent tragedies like this from impacting our communities. That is why one of my first acts as a freshman member of Congress was introducing an amendment to the Republicans' H.R. 2 border bill, which they are now threatening to shut the government down over, which aimed to bolster the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to combat cross-border threats posed by transnational criminal organizations. This amendment, which would have strengthened DHS's ability to combat organizations engaging in criminal activity, such as drug trafficking and human smuggling, was voted down by every single Republican member. sitting in this hearing room today and on this committee. While Republicans voted this and every other Democratic amendment down, I know enacting meaningful legislation is needed to address the issues at the southern border. That's why I have introduced the United Against Transnational Criminal Organizations Act. Several of my Democratic colleagues on this committee have signed on to this bill, which directs DSS to take a range of actions to combat illicit criminal cartel activity that undermines our homeland security. The bill directs DHS to establish a joint task force bringing together multiple agency components to conduct operations to combat cross-border threats posed by TCOs and organizations engaged in the trafficking of fentanyl and its materials across the land border of U.S. This bill directs DHS to establish an integrated border intelligence analytical cell to improve information sharing regarding the concentrated surge of migration, smuggling, and trafficking. And since we know a vast amount of fentanyl is trafficked through our ports of entry, it requires DHS to issue a strategy to improve the effectiveness of the screening of vehicles, persons, and cargo at land ports of entry that are at high risk of being related to transnational criminal organizations. My question to you, Professor Poston, would you agree that a legislation such as my United Against Transnational Criminal Organizations Act is a more effective measure to solving the issues at our border versus impeaching a secretary over policy differences?
Thank you, Mr. Tanadar. Again, I'm not an immigration policy expert, but the bill that you propose is certainly within Congress's power to enact. It may have an effect on immigration policy. Impeachment will have no effect on immigration policy.
Thank you.